All right, we saw in the last video how we added complex numbers and how we subtract complex numbers, but let's just take a quick example here. So if you learn best by seeing the examples, then this video is for you. But if you're only interested in the theory, I would just suggest skipping ahead to the next video where we will look at multiplication and division of complex numbers. But if you would like to see an example, then here we go. So let's say again we have a complex number c, and in this case let's put some numbers in. So let's make the complex number equal to 7 plus 10i. And we have another complex number w, and this complex number is equal to 3 plus 7i. Perfect. All right, let's see what happens if we have to add c and w. So we see c plus w as the complex numbers, and as before we just write it out, 7 plus 10i, so that's c, and we add 3 plus 7i. And as we saw before in the previous video, I would of course suggest that you watched that before this one if you haven't watched it yet, but we saw that all you have to do when adding complex numbers is to take the real part of c, which is this part, and add it with the real part of w, which is this part. So what we have is, let's just keep the real parts in the green color here. So it's 7 plus 3, that's the real part of the c and the real part of w. And then we have to add, let's make the imaginary part maybe another shade of green. All right, so the imaginary part is 10i for c, and we add it with 7i for w. All right, we see this is pretty easy to calculate. 7 plus 3, that's just 10. And here for the complex part, not the complex part, sorry, the imaginary part, we have 17i. So our new complex number, which is a sum of two complex numbers, so the real part of our new complex number, well, that would be equal to 10. And the imaginary part of our new complex number, well, that would be equal to 17. And once again, I've said it before, but remember that we don't include the I when we have to write the imaginary part. We simply take the number that's multiplied by I. And now is also a good point. Now, it's a good time to say that in general with these complex numbers, you're gonna see a lot of maybe a little complicated formulas for something that's actually quite simple, especially when we'll look into the multiplication and division. But in my opinion, it's best not to remember those formula. It's best to just follow the rules of how you multiply into the parentheses and so on. Just follow these rules, and then remember to have like the real part is one part of the number and the imaginary part is another part. And then you should just be able to calculate all of it instead of remembering a lot of rules. Then it's simply just algebra. So let's go ahead and see what's happened if we say c and we subtract w. Well, in this case, we have 7 plus 10i, that's the same. And then we subtract 3 plus 7i. Now, and as I said, you could go back to my previous video, look, how do I subtract the complex number? But it's way easier to just do the algebra, just multiply this minus into the parenthesis and see what happens. So we have, let's once again keep the real parts in this green shade. We have 7 minus 3 because we get a minus 3 from this part because we multiply the minus in. So 7 minus 3. And then for the complex part, we have 10i from c, and then we have to take the imaginary part of w, but there comes a minus here. And again, we just using the normal rules for how we multiply into a parentheses. So we subtract 7i. And if we just do this is basic calculations, then we get 4 and we get plus 3i. There we go. So that's our new complex numbers, and these are our results. So if we were given an exercise where we were given these two complex numbers and they asked us what is the product, not the product, but what is the sum and what is the difference between these two, well, then your answer would simply be that the sum would be equal to this, And if we subtract them, you would get this. And here we see that the imaginary part is 3 and the real part is 4 when we subtract the numbers. All right, that's all for this video. In the next one, we will look at, I actually think we will look at the complex conjugates before looking into multiplication and division.